good question about PHA, which is, I'm guessing, the Philadelphia Housing Authority, and solarizing the PHA. Can we talk about, I guess, what we can do with public housing in the city, at the city or state level, as far as using renewable infrastructure and that as a jobs program too, or like internship programs for high school students?
Yeah, that's a great question. I helped, that's a weird, anyway. I helped AOC and Bernie write this Green New Deal for Public Housing Act and research it. And we talk about the Green New Deal for public housing in the book as well. And it's, public housing is often in very, very bad shape. There's 1 million units of public housing across the country with about 2 million people living in them. And many of them are in Philadelphia and in PA, including in rural Pennsylvania as well. And so we absolutely can and must create jobs, not just solarizing them, certainly adding some solar panels, but also getting rid of the mold and the flaking lead paint, other unsanitary conditions, and really modernizing and beautifying these units. In Europe last year, the Mies van der Rohe Prize for Architecture, European-wide prize, went to a public housing green retrofit in Bordeaux, France, which was beautiful. So, one of the leading edges actually of architectural and operational at the kind of buildings level and even financial ingenuity, if you can call it that, is in public housing retrofits that are green and that really benefit the people in them. So I think we absolutely have to do that. We need a much broader conversation, I think, about what the green housing justice looks like in Philly, because most people, including most low-income people, don't live in public housing. So one idea that's in the Nikhil Saval campaign, which I'm really excited about, and that we drew inspiration for this idea from a campaign in Baltimore, is the idea of a kind of mass program of retrofitting vacant or dilapidated row houses and turning them into community land trust properties and moving them permanently off of the housing market so that the families living in them have complete stability indefinitely. There are about 25,000 of these vacant homes in Philly. We think we could turn that into housing for 125,000 people. That would take a huge amount of work to retrofit and get those buildings into good shape. And again, this would create affordable housing off the market for an extremely long time. And this is something that a group called United Workers is doing in Baltimore right now. We need some state public investment up front to make those repairs and to take ownership of the land. And then it should be, we think it should be democratically managed by local organizations. And it could be a wide variety of organizations that ultimately take this up. And then the last thing I'll just say quickly on kind of green housing affordability is I hear so frustrating is there are these urbanists, and I love density and I love to be in a crowd, obviously. But what the idea is that is densifying Philly, like Broad Street, with only private developers. And we're supposed to believe that these luxury condos are one day going to be affordable to people, and they're not. What we need to do is bring density to different parts of the city, bring new construction, but a substantial amount of the new housing has to be below market rate, which means subsidized, and ideally a lot of that will be social housing, mixed income social housing or public housing. And we need rent control so that when investments are going into neighborhoods, that doesn't cause displacement of the very people who would benefit the most. If you don't have rent control and a neighborhood improves, quote unquote, then suddenly it becomes unaffordable often to many of the residents of that neighborhood. And tenants are especially vulnerable to displacement through gentrification. So I think we not only need to have green public housing, but more broadly, we need to have a vision of what we're trying to do is create communities that are much healthier, that have, when it's appropriate, more density, more public transit access, but that these improvements, which are green and improvements of convenience and infrastructure, don't displace anybody, but are actually about bringing more working class people into the city, more racialized communities, more poor people, and that everybody in Philly should have the option, if they want, to live a short walk from where they work, to live a short walk from school, short walk from daycare. So it's not pushing poor people out and bringing rich people in for a new urban utopia of yuppies, but is instead a kind of democratic access to density, democratic access to services and to walkability and to bikeability. Not walkability as like, oh, walkability, great, big score on Zillow, now you're rich. No, walkability is a right of everybody who lives in urban and rural and suburban communities. So I think that's a vision that we can move towards, and there's a lot of work being done on the ground. And that's, people on the side have been talking a bit about coalition building. I think we've seen with the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act, when we can see this kind of policies more and more work together from housing organizations, housing justice groups, community justice groups, racial justice groups, and the environmental movement, working, hand in hand for changes to the urban landscape and suburban landscape as well.